So you're all very welcome to the session, and thanks for taking the time, as always, to come along to this. If you have any questions, please do feel free to put them into the chat or into the Q&A section. Um, and I'm hoping to keep this relatively short and to the point. So what we'll be looking at today is marking and feedback tools in Canvas, and I suppose the standard element or the common element across all these tools is really just that they might be a way of providing more interactive or more kind of engaging feedback, or rather providing feedback in a more engaging or interactive way, and are that they're tools which can hopefully save you a bit of time when it does come to offering marks and feedback to students. So the main features that we're going to be looking at are really all within Canvas and are primarily within the speed grader system. So we might just get straight into it in terms of these tools. The main way to access these obviously is if you have an assignment in Canvas, to go into that assignment, and from there you can click into the speed grader option for this. So this is an assessment that I submitted a sample paper against earlier today. So we're all pretty familiar with SpeedGrader. On the left-hand side, you have the student's work. On the right-hand side, you have a space for downloading the original file, for adding in marks, for giving them kind of general feedback. And up along the top of the SpeedGrader section, then you have various annotation tools for offering feedback in a more kind of specific kind of way. So the first tool that I'd like to demonstrate today is very simply a text-to-speech tool. So the idea with this is simply that it will allow it will allow me to basically narrate feedback into the system, and that will produce what I narrate, what I speak as text in this kind of general feedback area. So the way that you can access this feature is simply by clicking the speech recognition button, which is down here. So if I click on that, what that will bring up is this pop-up, which very simply just asks me to click the record button to begin. So for example, if I was looking at some students' work and I didn't feel like typing, or I felt this would be quicker than typing, or as often happens to me when I'm trying to articulate something through writing it down, I can kind of write myself into a spiral or into a wall. So maybe a quicker and easier way for some people of doing that might be to pull up this pop-up and then to click record and to say, "Hi Dara, very good work in general. So the introduction that you used is very clear and to the point. The use of real-world case data throughout was very good. Full stop. The report did suffer maybe from a lack of visual elements. I think you could have represented some of the data in a more accessible, clearer way," so on and so forth. When I'm finished with that, I just hit the stop option. And as you see there, that's basically articulated or kind of represented what I spoke into a text format and put it into the general feedback section. And there's one or two things maybe obvious to be aware of. So one thing is obviously there's certain parts of this which I'd want to remove, basically just me kind of starting. So for example, we want to remove that at the beginning, maybe we want to remove a section at the end, particularly so on and so forth. Another element with this obviously is that it doesn't really offer punctuation or capitalization or anything at all like that. Something which, for example, if I want to end a sentence, a workaround that I have for this is I simply say full stop, the same way we might if we're using some other text-to-speech software. And what I can do then is I can very simply, if I want to, I can simply copy that. And if I go to find and replace, so Control F or Apple F if you're using a Mac, what you can do is you can find instances of this, and for example, replace it with that. Might go replace. You see back in here, then that's kind of done that. So that's a bit of a hack just in terms of being able to identify when I'm speaking when one sentence is ending and the next is beginning. And obviously watch out for things like how names are spelt or how particular kind of assessment elements are spelled. But in general, compared to like having to write a feedback for each and every student submission, that's a maybe more accessible and kind of useful way of being able to offer students feedback very kind of quickly and easily. And I know what some Canvas users do is, for example, they might use that text to speech to just kind of, if you can think of it this way, almost to just spill their guts or to just speak out loud all the feedback that they have for students. And then they might, either within Canvas or in something like Word, they might basically just take that kind of raw copy and just tidy it up by kind of cutting certain bits, moving certain sections around, adding in punctuation and formatting and so on and so forth. So that's one tool which is available to us, excuse me, inside in Canvas, which can make offering feedback a bit easier. Another excuse me, another option which is available to us is a new feature which allows us basically to do a screen capture to record our screen in order to provide the students with a screencast. So I suppose what I would often compare this to is sitting down with the student at a table and having a printed copy of their submission on the table, very simply using your finger to point out this section here is good, this section here could do with work, here's how you lost some points, so on and so forth. And I suppose the advantage to something like this is it just allows us to, rather than, for example, me trying to articulate only through text how, where in certain sections of their submission they lost marks or could have done better or where certain problems were encountered. This allows me to basically show rather than tell. So the way that we can use this feature, so again, it is kind of similar to sitting down with a student, having their assessment in front on the table, printed out, and just kind of pointing at different sections to help articulate the feedback that I'm giving them. So the way we can do this is very simply by clicking on this little camera icon down at the bottom of SpeedGrader. And what that will do is it will pull up this pop-up, and from there, what we can do is we can change screen capture to enabled. What that will then do is it will bring up this pop-up and we can select which tab or window or whatever we want to show. Now, maybe something to be aware of just first of all is like the default, the first tab will always be the tab that we currently have open. So you can see that kind of previewed there. The difficulty if we select this is it does create this kind of infinity effect. So yeah, you can see there's an endless loop of these happening. So the way in which we can avoid that is very simply what we can do is we can just grab the URL for this particular student submission, open a different tab, or we could put it into a different window and put it in there. And then when we go to record our screen, what we can do is again, we can enable screen capture. And in terms of the tab or window, we can select the one that we just opened here. So you just look out for the SpeedGrader tab or the SpeedGrader window that doesn't have the pop-up in the preview like it does there. So something like this. And if we hit share, you can see there that that's available. We can see up in Chrome at the top of the screen that this tab's content is being shared. So this is being shared for the recording. And when we're happy to begin, we can simply decide what our microphone is here, and then we can simply hit start recording. We get a countdown of 3, 2, 1. And then what we might do is we might say, hi, John, just giving you some feedback here. In general, really good work. I like how you've opened this here, but you maybe could have brought in a little bit more detail about the real world data or the kind of findings that were found. This graphic here is really effective. This one down here is less so, so on and so forth. Where this might be particularly useful, for example, is just in if you have, for example, if a student is giving you something which might have a lot of visual elements, so a lot of diagrams, a lot of graphics, data representation, or things like that, this is a good way of being able to kind of show what you're talking about while speaking over it. When you're happy with the recording you've done, you can come back to the original tab where we opened it up. But I'm going to hit this blue finish recording button up here. Not entirely sure if you can hear it, but you'll get the idea that basically it will give us the screen capture and the audio that went over it at the same time. When we're happy, if we want to re-record it, we can do it by hitting start over. But what we might say is, yeah, sample screencast feedback, give it a title, hit save media. And as you see, what that does then is it adds in this comment in here so that students can access it. Maybe we just need to give it a few minutes just because it's currently being converted. But when we're happy with all that, we'll just put a sample grade in here just for the sake of argument. We can hit submit. And if we view as student, yeah, what this will allow us to do is to create double copy. And what it will allow us to do is we can click as a student, the option there, and you can see that they can have that played back to them. So that's a useful feature in terms of just being able to, again, just offer feedback in a way that's maybe a little bit more interactive or a little bit more visual or a little bit more engaging. Another tool which is available to us then within Canvas is also rubrics. So rubrics are a useful feature in terms of being able to make, uh, the marking process and the feedback process maybe a little bit easier for the lecture. So within any assignment, any kind of file upload assignment or so forth, there will be an option down here which you'll see for rubric, and the way we can add a rubric or create a new rubric is by simply clicking on the rubric button. By default, it will give us kind of a generic rubric which hasn't been filled out. I'm going to attach a rubric that I've already created just because I think it just makes it a little bit easier in terms of being able to demonstrate kind of what I'm talking about here. So I'm just going to attach this rubric that I used for a previous assessment. So we can see now that essentially this rubric is what I'd call attached to this particular assignment. When you've developed a rubric, what you can do is you can attach it to one or to multiple assessments. So for example, if you have a rubric that you use or kind of a marking scheme that you use across multiple modules, you can use it across those multiple modules without any problem at all. If we want to disassociate, so if I don't want to use this rubric for this particular assessment, I can click on the trash can icon here to delete it. But if I want to edit the rubric, what I can do is I can click on the pencil icon here to edit rubric. Now, what you might get here sometimes is kind of a warning message, um, which just states that if I've used this rubric somewhere else and I begin editing now, it can just have unintended consequences, let's say. So that's just maybe something to be aware of. It's not a big deal, but it's maybe just something to be aware of if that pop-up does come up. So if I want to, I can change the title, I can change the number of marks associated with each section, so on and so forth. For the purpose of this, let's say that we want to add another rubric, another criteria rather, onto the section here. So essentially, I want to add on another column to this particular rubric. So the way I can do that is I can scroll to the bottom of the rubric and I can click on the plus criterion button here. And what this will allow me to do is it will allow me to create a new one. But to be honest, what's usually as easy, just because we have these other criteria already set up and they have a particular structure, is you can just duplicate one of those other ones. So I'm just going to duplicate the first row. So we'll call this authoring tools and features used, and we set it at 10%. So you can see here that has created this new rubric for me. If I want to at any stage, I can get rid of it by hitting the trash icon, or I can edit it by using the pencil icon. You can see here that for this entire rubric, there's kind of four ranges that we can use. That's how all of these have been set up. So you can broadly think of these, I guess, as like very good, good, bad, very bad. But you can set up the rubric with as many ranges or in kind of whatever format you want. But if you do want to edit some of these, what you can do is you can very simply click on the pencil icon. So for example, for this, we'll maybe replace what's there with something more appropriate for this particular criterion. Do the same for this. Do the same for this. And do the same for this. So through that now we've created an additional criteria or an additional kind of column for this particular rubric. The way that we can then begin using this is very simply by going into SpeedGrader. In SpeedGrader, once we've attached a particular rubric to an assessment, you'll see here that there is an option in this, there's an option in SpeedGrader now for view rubric. So I'm just going to expand this kind of side of the screen a little bit. If we click view rubric, you can see there what that will do is it will bring up the rubric in question. If we want to then, we can very simply go through the process of identifying how students have done against the various criteria and marking scheme by just clicking on the various ratings that are available to us inside here. Once all of that is done, what we can do is we can hit save. And that then will basically present that view to the students, whereby they can see how they've scored against each of the criteria. And the feedback that we put into the various criteria within the rubric will be visible to them. So that's a very straightforward use of a rubric, I suppose, primarily just as a way of giving a quick breakdown to students in terms of the feedback based on the different sections in the rubric, and also, yeah, kind of, I'll talk a bit more about these, but the points associated with it. So some other things, some other options in terms of how you can use a rubric. One option which is available to you is to use this feature called ranges. So if you see here, underneath each of the criteria titles, there's an option for range. And what that does is it basically, instead of, as you see there, instead of 5 points, 3 points, 2 points, 0 points, what this allows us to do is to change how it's calculated so that this is no longer 5, but it's kind of between 5 and 3. So just for the sake of argument, I'm just going to set this to, let's say, 10, just to make it a little bit easier. And you see there, depending on the amount of points that I associate with each of the different kind of elements or the different criteria in the rubric, it will allow me to it will automatically divide the kind of range or the number of points associated in each of the scoring ranges. So what this means if I update the rubric is very simply, if I go back in here and I load this and I decide I want to use the rubric again, what this will allow me to do then is, instead of necessarily having to click on each of the different elements, it just allows me a little bit more flexibility in how I distribute points. So for example, instead of maybe clicking on this, I might say, okay, well, in terms of general structure, that's where 10%, I'll say they got 8 out of that. And you see there what the system does is it automatically detects what range the score 8 is in for this particular criteria and automatically selects that feedback. So we might say, all right, they didn't do great in this. We'll say that's a 9. We'll say that this is 21 or maybe 20, so on and so forth. So that's kind of a way of being able to select the various elements there. One thing to kind of make note of is that if I just edit this, if you do select the range option for each of the criteria, and it has to be selected for each individual criteria, that gives a little bit more kind of support just in terms of automatic detection of scores and a little bit more flexibility in terms of how you distribute marks. So if we view a rubric, and because I've selected range on each of these, I might say, okay, that's an 8, and it'll automatically select that. That's 3 or 2 or a 5. And it'll automatically select that, and so on and so forth. And if we come, we can also just click on them, but just allows us a little bit more flexibility in how we distribute the marks. And when we hit save, that then will be reflected to the students in terms of the criteria and also kind of where they scored on the criteria. An additional feature which is available to us in this as well is for each of the criteria. We can add a little bit more feedback if we want to by clicking on the comment icon here. So we might say, overall structure, very good, just lost some points on XYZ. From a student perspective then, when they enter into it, I'll just hop into that very briefly as a student. What they'll see within that space by clicking view rubric evaluation is they'll see how they scored, but they'll also see the kind of additional comments that I've added in there. So that adds quite a bit of, I suppose, functionality just in terms of being able to use the rubric, but also being able to add in anything extra that I want through the use of the comment feature as well. Excuse me, if we go back into the rubric then, there's just a couple of additional options which can just customize maybe how you want to use the rubric. And again, I suppose maybe it goes without saying, but the obvious advantage of this is instead of going through student submissions and having to type all this out bit by bit, if I set up a rubric effectively with kind of a good clear marking structure and decent amount of feedback in each of the different kind of ranges, then that allows me to give the student quite comprehensive feedback, I think, um, quite quickly and easily, because I'm not having to type all of this out. I'm very simply going into the rubric and I'm going, okay, yeah, so in terms of the 10 points for general structure, they got 6. In terms of the range and quality of sources, they got 20. In terms of the annotation description, they got 19, so on and so forth. So some additional features on top of the ranges and so on, and that is one option which you can do if you don't want to use the ranges is you can click the option to write free-form comments when assessing students. What this basically does is it removes those kind of ranges so that within this space, when you view the rubric, you can just type in comments. So it kind of removes that kind of feature. To my mind, that's not why I'd want to use a rubric. I want the advantage of the rubric, I guess, for me, is just that I'm able to actually automatically add kind of feedback based on the different criteria that I've used. So I personally wouldn't kind of have much use for that option. If you want to, you can remove points from the rubric, and what that does is it makes it strictly, there's no points calculation here, it's just strictly for kind of giving feedback. You never have to worry too much about posting outcome results, the Learning Mastery Gradebook. One option which is available to you is that you can hide the score total for the assessment results. So what that does is it basically hides, you see there, the total score associated with this rubric. So you can still use it as normal, it'll just hide that kind of total points element for reasons that I'm just about to get into. So the other option which is available to us is that we can use this rubric for assessment grading. And what that basically does is it will distribute or calculate the points that are associated with the rubric and that you issue through the rubric for the student's actual assessment mark. So if I select this, what it will allow me to do is basically allow me to score automatically score the student based on how I use the rubric in SpeedGrader. Now, if I hit update rubric here, something which we will see is this pop-up. Now, why that pop-up is coming up, and this is important to be aware of if you're going to use the rubric for assessment grading, you can see here the total number of points associated with the rubric is 85. The total number of points that I set up with this assessment is 100. So if I update rubric and I is that the points associated with this assessment has dropped from 100 to 85. So why that is important is because I guess if you were, as we all know, within the Akari system, we have to score everything out of 100. If I'm using this rubric and let's say the rubric only adds up to 50, what will happen is that a student will end up getting a score of 35. Let's say they might get a score of 40 out of 50. Now that's essentially 80%. But if I'm taking it literally, I might end up pasting like 40 as a mark for a very good kind of piece of work into the Akari system, which is something we want to avoid. So just to demonstrate, if we just update that rubric, we just go into the system. or into speed grade or what this looks like, I'll just get rid of that grade. You see there it's identifying a grade out of 85. If I view the rubric, I might say, okay, it's 10, that's worth, we say 18, that or that one there, they did very well. So we'll say it's not quite 35, but it's 33. That wasn't great, so I'm just going to click on the option there, and this was only okay. And if I hit save, excuse me, you can see there that it has automatically calculated the grade out as a 71. Now, obviously, I can change that if I want to kind of manually, but it is just something to be aware of. Just my own personal preference, but I guess how I would tend to use the rubric system is the options that I would select for the rubric system is it's useful to have the range ticked for each of the criteria. Something which I found useful, to be honest, is I might kind of make it 100 points in total, so the rubric always adds up to 100. And I wouldn't generally use it for assessment grading. If I have it set up this way, if we just go back into SpeedGrader very quickly, what this does allow me to do is very simply, I'll just get rid of that mark. I can view the rubric and I can say, okay, yeah, that's 10, that's 9 out of 10, that's 18 out of 20, that's 33 out of 35, that's 9 out of 20, and that is 6 out of 15. And at the bottom, you'll see that indicates, okay, a total of 75 out of 100. And I might be happy with that, but I might also go, well, in fairness to the student, I think that's kind of being a bit too generous. Realistically, that's more like a 72. And I can enter that in directly. I can submit. And then that's that student's marks done. So the advantage of the rubric really, I guess, for me anyway, is just really having that clear structure within the system for my own kind of marking, and just the ability to be able to just as I go, um, through a very kind of quick process, identify the relevant feedback based on the particular criteria, and also allows me also the option to add in additional comments and additional feedback if I wish to do so. And something which you've probably already surmised is that all of these kind of marking features, obviously there's no need to use all of them, but they can all be used in kind of unison. So, as a student, the student who can look at this result once it's released to them will be able to see the rubric feedback that I've given them, the video feedback that I've given them, and anything that I've put into the general feedback as well. A final feature, but I think it's probably the least useful one out of the bunch, is the comment library, which is available for this general feedback section. So if I go into the section and I click on the comment icon, that's up here with the 7 next to it. What Canvas can provide is basically it can provide kind of a comment library. So if I feel like I am repeatedly saying the same kind of thing again and again to students, what I can do is I can come into the section, I can add a comment to the library. So we'll just copy and paste some text. And then if I click that, what that will allow me to do is it will add any comment directly into this general feedback section, which is all well and good. The issue with it is that very simply, if I select, because I might want to say, yeah, this is a complete and systematic approach to developing something. It exhibits effective use of authoring tools. So I might want to say this, and then because it is a different feedback element, I might want to say this as well. If I select a different comment, what I will do instead of adding to the existing comment, it will replace it entirely, which is less than ideal. Now, one way around this is if I decide, okay, there is a kind of, I'm repeatedly giving pretty much the exact same feedback to a particular type of assessment which students are submitting against. What I can do is I can write, I suppose, a more comprehensive set of feedback, save that in the comment library, and then kind of add that in directly. So instead of trying to add multiple bits, I can put in, I suppose, a more comprehensive overall kind of set of feedback for them, and that will appear in that there. So in terms of the advanced features that I was hoping to cover today, that's pretty much it. in terms of any supports, or if you need any help with any of these features. Obviously, as always, we would suggest that the first step is contacting Canvas support agents, just because they're available 24/7. They're there to help. And again, you can do that by clicking on the help option in the menu, web chat with Canvas support faculty, and that will allow you to talk to a Canvas support agent directly, and they can help you with that straight away through Canvas. In terms of other resources, if you go to our website, tell.cit.ie, what we have in there under staff resources is links to our help doc kind of knowledge base, which has articles on Canvas, Zoom, everything else inside the system here. There's also a link to our YouTube channel where we have all of the videos. Such as this one, recordings of all the videos that we've provided, as well as videos of other initiatives and CPD that we've done. And for other elements which kind of aren't covered in through Canvas support or through Service Desk, you can contact us by emailing edtech@mtu.ie. So in terms of the session today, that's it really. If anybody has any questions on anything I went through there, myself and my colleague Roisin be very happy to take those now. Just ask you to maybe put them into the chat or else into the Q&A area. If you don't have any comments, maybe just give us a yes or a thumbs up or an I'm okay in chat, just to let us know that you're not kind of, furiously typing. So I'm just going to shut up for a minute or two if you want to ask a question, or else if you'd like to just let us know that no, you're good after all that. Okay. I'm going to take that as a sign that everybody is relatively happy. Ashling or Luis, if you are typing a question, maybe just give us a wait or something in the chat, just because I don't want to cut anybody off. So we'll stay on just for a minute or two more, but yeah, otherwise just to say thanks very much everyone for coming along to the session today. I really appreciate it, especially at this busy time of year and with the weather being good. And yeah, just hope that the rest of the semester goes well for everyone and that everyone has a good and relaxing summer. So thanks so much everyone for your time, and yeah, take care. Thanks very much.